Yo, what's up, guys? It's your boy Chris coming at you with another episode to the Beautiful Struggle podcast. And this is episode 31. And today we have a very familiar guest on. But before we introduce him, if this is your first time tuning into the Beautiful Struggle podcast, this podcast is all about empowering you to live the life that you deserve. All right, so if that sounds interesting to you, that's something that you want to learn more about, please do me a huge favor and just leave a rating and review down below and subscribe to the podcast, and I would really appreciate it. And with that being said, my guest on today is Tanner Jenkins.
Yes,
what's up,
sir.
bro? How you doing?
I'm well. Thank you for having me on again.
Of course. This is your third time, right?
I believe so. 3 or 4, yeah.
For sure. And you know what's funny? A lot of people actually like when you get on the podcast. They're like, who is that dude that reads the books? Like, so you guys already know that he's super educated, super smart dude. And, you know, we were just having a conversation before the podcast, you know, about everything that you're learning. And it's really interesting to see you apply those things to your life.
Yeah.
Like, for me, coming from the outside, a little bit older than you, like just watching you maneuver and just like apply those things is pretty interesting to me. And I'm not just leaving them in the dust. You know, I'm trying to help them out as much as I can.
100%.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your guidance where I need it, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
But for sure, it is a cool process.
Yep. So today on this podcast, you know, I really want to speak about this one word, and that word is fear. And so one of my boys the other day actually asked me a pretty good question. He's like, when you go on the podcast, how do you like come up with what you're going to talk about? You just go on there and just blabber? And I'm just like, nah. Like if I have a guest, I have questions ready and whatnot. But if I'm by myself or if we're having a conversation like this one, then I like to see, you know, how my week's going and see like what's being talked about and really like talk about what's on my heart. And like the word fear has been coming up a lot this week. I've been hearing people talk about it and just hearing how people deal with it. So it's just really interesting to me. So I want to bring you on and talk about fear today for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
And you know, that's a topic I think about a lot.
Yeah.
So,
you know, we hear a lot of people talk about how they deal with fear, and a lot of people they say you should not fear anything. People say that fear is just an illusion. I've heard that multiple times. In fact,
I have too.
Kobe Bryant had an interview, and he said that fear is just an illusion. And you hear people say that you should face your fears. So I think this podcast, we're just going to dive into like, you know, what is fear, what causes it, how to deal with it, how we deal with it. And so the first question I had for you, and I can go first if you want, is what is one of your biggest fears in life, or what was one of your biggest fears, was or is?
Yeah. And we briefly touched on it before we got on this podcast, but I think that it really was brought to my attention in the book Wild at Heart, which we actually did a review on.
Yeah.
Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. He talked about like a man's biggest fear is, am I enough? And I hadn't really been conscious of that until I read it. And when you really think about it, like everything in a man's life comes back to that. Like, am I enough? Worrying like, am I good enough? Am I strong enough? Am I, you know, whatever enough? So I think that that's like my biggest fear is like, am I enough of a man? Am I good enough?
Yeah.
Do I have what it takes like to do whatever I want to do?
For sure.
I think that like resonates on every level of whatever struggle I have. Yeah. So
That
that's
makes
for
sense.
me. What about you?
For me, this is going to be like kind of interesting, but for me, it was commitment. And actually, this is going to answer the next question I had. And it's not necessarily like committing to one. Well, yeah, honestly, I'll just say this. Look, growing up, I moved around a lot. So and it's not, I don't think it was ever a bad thing that we moved around a lot and like just bouncing around schools, was always a new kid. And that like that's where the fear, I guess, came from, because I'd never wanted to be maybe in one place. And, you know, with me having a mindset of growth, I never wanted to hold back and put myself in a position where there might be more out there for me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And
So,
it's like an unstable environment.
Yeah. So that was almost a fear for me, and how that translates to like the relationship with my wife is I had to learn how when it comes to relationships, it's okay to like be content with this one person, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that I was out there messing around with 1,000 different women, but I've always had that thing like, what if there's more? And I really had to learn like, if this is what was placed in front of you by God, then you need to like take advantage of this, you know?
Yeah.
So for sure, just like, and even it goes to like little stuff like, and my wife will tell you, being committed to staying in like one area. Like, well, the first time we moved in together was in a 2-bedroom, and then now we're in this 1-bedroom, and now I'm like, I want to move somewhere else. Like, I don't want to be stuck in this city for so long, you know? I want to have that flexibility to go wherever I want, you know?
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, and the experience it comes with moving around, and it's like
and I think that's part of being a millennial as well. Like, we don't want to be tied down to anything. Like, we don't want to have a home right away. Some of us would rather just live in an apartment for like a couple years, and like, or we don't want to like go out and buy a car and be committed to that for a long period of time.
And that can go back to like short attention spans and the environment we've been raised in. You know, with the internet. Yeah. It's like you're always grabbing at a new thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So to commit long term to something, women, houses, cars, like whatever it is.
It's just like,
it's difficult.
It is difficult. And for me, I think I definitely still deal with that fear of like buying a home and staying there for 20 years. And like, what if I don't want to live there anymore, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to remove myself and just stick to these apartments for a while, you know? Yeah. But
you're still young. I think that's a young thing too.
Yeah.
Like, you still don't necessarily have a foundation where it's like, oh, I know this is what my life looks like, you know?
Yeah. Yes and no.
Yeah. And even like having a kid, if you had a kid, it would kind of ground you in a way where it's like, I want this kid to have a home to grow up in. You know, it's like different things to experience and
interesting.
The different perspectives that come with those different situations.
For sure.
Yeah.
Where do you think your fear came from? I can tell you, so I briefly gave you mine.
I think that all these fears, like the one I said, which is like, am I enough? And then when you said commitment, I think those are like innate fears in humans. So like, I feel you when you say you're afraid to commit, because I'm afraid to commit too. Like, you know, we have conversations of like where I'm at in life right now, where it's like commitment is like, is that the right thing? A lot of people tell me it's not, but in my heart I feel that it is, and it's like, it's interesting. It's like, I think that these are all innate fears that we need to source through or something like that.
No, that's really good. And I also feel like it's also the environment we grew up in. So for me, like in our family, commitment wasn't a thing. Like, that's not really a thing to be seen.
Were your parents divorced?
They divorced when, what was I, like 15 or 16? But just like outside of that, even when I was younger, just seeing like a lack of commitment from a lot of people. So like you kind of see what's wrong and what's right, and you don't want that, you know?
Yeah.
So
yeah, committing in the sense of like women is interesting for sure. Because
talk about it.
I think that is like something that's generational. You know, like your parents are divorced, my parents stayed together, but my mom's parents were divorced. My dad's parents stayed together, and so like he made that a priority in his relationship. Like, we stay together no matter what. Yeah. And I think that foundation that he has set reflects on me. It's like, now that's ingrained in my head. Like, oh, if you marry a woman, it's not always going to be what you thought it would be. It's not always going to be great, but you stick with it through thick and thin. Like, he's showed that to me, and so that's in me now. Oh, for sure. And that's something that Morgan and I are practicing like 1,000%. Like, we want to be, no disrespect to everybody before us, but we want to set the foundation strong and set the standard high for everybody else. So when we have kids that come around like you, they know like that's instilled in them. Like, this is how it's supposed to look. This is how it's supposed to be. You know. Yeah. Providing that example that's positive. For sure. So, let's go into like how you deal with fear, how you deal with it. Because I have a couple different ways that I deal with fears. You know, some people say
I had a conversation with somebody, and they were almost saying that you should turn away from fear and not acknowledge it. And I didn't agree with that at all. Like, I wasn't feeling that.
Yeah.
I'm the type where I want to face the fears. Like, I think you
Yeah.
should just go ahead and just face it.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your friend was saying, to be honest. He got a different perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So you think you should just face it?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to, like they say, you can't go around it, you got to go through it, type of thing. Like, if you have a fear, the best way to get rid of it is to just acknowledge it, go through it.
For sure.
See how you can handle it. But it's kind of like abstract to say that. But even in terms of, like, I don't know, like, you fear, like, you get nervous for, like, say, a job interview, and then you go on 5 job interviews, and you're no longer nervous. Like, now you know the drill.
Yeah, for sure.
Same thing with, like, women or whatever. It's like,
yeah, and I think, you know, to give you guys practical advice, if you guys are in a situation where you guys are fearing something, like, let's just say going to a job interview or starting a business or something like that, I really genuinely believe the best way to face it or to deal with it is to literally acknowledge that, okay, I am nervous or I am scared, I am fearful, and just go through it and have the courage to go through with it.
yeah.
So
Just like the practice.
you said
It's
what?
like exposure therapy. That's like a thing in, like, psychology, is like exposure therapy. So I heard Jordan Peterson talk about that. Somebody was, like, afraid of I think it was needles. And so as they did their therapy, he would bring in a needle and he would put it on, like, a table far away. And the person would get anxious. And as they went through more sessions, he would bring it closer. And then finally he put the needle there and told him to pick it up. And so it was just,
what type of needle we talking about?
like a needle that would go in your vein.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was afraid of needles. And so exposure therapy through repetition, you know. I think that's how you get rid of fear.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I heard one time about Michael Jordan, he's like, they asked him, are you ever afraid that you're not gonna accomplish this or accomplish that or be the best? And he's like, when you're doing what you're supposed to do and you're working hard, working smart, you should have no fear. So I hear stuff like that, and it's kind of conflicting, you know, how other people deal with fear. You know, some people, and then you hear Kobe that say fear is just an illusion, which you can argue that it is,
because it's just perception.
Yeah.
Like, you can perceive to be afraid of whatever it is, or perceive to be not afraid. It's like everything in life is just a perception.
For sure. Do you believe that people have the capability to be fearless?
No, I don't.
Look, I'll tell you, I don't think they do, because I thought I wasn't afraid of height. Bro, look, listen, this is kind of funny, but so Morgan and I went to this penthouse party, like, in downtown LA, like 2 months ago or something like that. When I looked over that balcony, I was like, yep. Like,
Your stomach dropped a little bit.
Something dropped. I was like, okay, this is a little scary, but, like, I just, like, just to bring it back, like, if you were in the woods and there's a giant bear in front of you or something, like, you're gonna have some type of fear, you know. There's always
it's like a part of your, like, mammalian brain, or the reptilian brain, like the reptilian brain, like the oldest part of your brain, or whatever it is, the mammalian, reptilian. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's like the oldest part of your brain that's ingrained in you to, like, fear things that will kill you. So I think that, like, you know, on a certain level, there is always gonna be a fear within you. But
so, what is it that everybody has? Explain
reptilian brain. So there's different, like, parts of the brain. There's, like, I don't know,
that we don't use anymore.
It's just, if you believe in, like, evolutionary theory, then there's newer parts of the brain that have developed through evolution, and there's older parts, and, like, the oldest part is, like, I think it's the reptilian part of your brain. I think I read that from, like, Jordan Peterson too. He talks about the psychology of that. And
so what that portion of the brain is,
it's kind of like innate things, like your ability to sense fear, in the sense of, like, you know, oh, I'm gonna die, or like, fire burns, so don't go there. You know, it's like rudimentary things.
Got you. That makes sense.
But I think in relation to fear, like, that's always gonna be there with certain things. But that's not really constructive for what we're talking about. We're talking about, like, things that you can fix through.
Yeah. No, that's interesting though. But something else that I like, sometimes I have conversation with people that are fearful about things, and I always tell them, like, ask yourself, are you going to die? And sometimes when you just ask yourself that and you take a step back, you're just like, okay, everything's going to be all right. I'm not going to die. I think they say a person's number one fear is doing public presentations or something like that.
Yeah.
And I remember in college, like, I think I allowed that to be one of my fears just because people would tell me that. But it wasn't until I told myself, like, I'm not going to die. Like, I'm going to be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But on the same coin, one day you will die. So whatever it is that you're afraid of, you should probably do it.
Yeah. I do a lot of public presentations at the school that I currently do, and I do feel nervous and fearful. But like I said, it gets better with time as you do it more and more. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I do feel like, with that concept of one day we are going to die, we don't know when we're going to die. To me, I try my best to apply that to myself every single day. So I really don't need any motivation because one day I'm going to die. And, it goes back to what we were talking about before we hopped on the podcast. What are we leaving behind?
Yeah. And I think another thing that, like, I'm infatuated with is, like, the liberation of your fears. And I mentioned that before.
And when you mean liberation?
Freedom.
Freedom, got you.
Yeah, liberation is like a synonym for freedom. And so it's like freeing yourself from your fears and the process of doing that over your lifetime. So you start out, you start out with no fears, but, say you start out 18 years old, you have a lot of fears and you have a lot of things that you need to, like, go through. And so, I don't know. I read that in The Way of the Superior Man. He talked about, the process of liberating yourself from all these fears and all these blockages, And, like, one of the things he mentioned is being open with love and opening yourself, liberating yourself in love. So, that in one of the simple things is, like, telling your friends you love them. Like, if your friends died and you didn't say that, you would feel some type of way. But you still fear, like, saying that and being vulnerable in that way. And so it's like that's an area of liberation that I see in my life that I can implement immediately. Is like,
what other steps in the process is he talking about?
As far as how, it's like facing it, straight up just facing it. That's how you liberate yourself. It's like, what do I fear? Okay, let me do that, and then you're liberated from the fear, and you feel lighter because of it. Like,
right.
Oh, I used to fear that, and then I did it, and now I don't feel that anymore, and so it's kind of off of your, like, psyche.
Yeah, and you're more confident.
Yeah, and that's like it's like a beautiful process.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm sure you've heard that like motivational speech by Mike Tyson, where he talks about the process of him going into a fight and going into the ring. And have you heard it?
I think so.
I'm pretty sure you have. Like, so he comes out and he's like, I'm like quoting. I'm not quoting him exactly. Paraphrasing him, and he says something like, when I'm getting ready, like, I'm terrified. I'm terrified this guy's gonna beat me. I've been training for so long. He has the capability of beating me. Like, I'm scared to death.
And he doesn't want to let down.
He doesn't want to let his people down. He doesn't want to let the crowd down. He's confident, but he's still very fearful. So he says he's walking to the ring. People are shouting, but his confidence, it's like he almost embraces it. And so when he embraces it, his confidence starts going up. And he's walking to the ring, and then he's like, when I get in the ring, I feel like I'm a god. And then from there, like, once he has that level of confidence, now he's looking at his enemy like a piece of meat. And he's like, I'm staring into their eyes, and if I see them blink, I know it's over.
And he's like using the fear to propel himself forward in a way.
Yeah. So I think when I seen that, I was just like, to me, that's a perfect example of how we can apply that to our life. Notice the fear, acknowledge it, and have the courage to embrace it, and then turn it around, and like you said, it propel you forward.
100%. I think that's a different perspective of fear that isn't necessarily thought about a lot.
Yeah, Mike was next level.
Yeah,
next level. So
it's crazy because, like, he talks about Muhammad Ali and how Muhammad Ali is like the real deal. Like, Muhammad Ali was a real killer. I've seen him say that. Like, but he wasn't he was like faking it.
Yeah,
and it's crazy.
I could be wrong, but was he crying during that interview?
Yeah, it was on like a podcast.
Yeah, so what he was basically saying is like Muhammad Ali was like the real truth. Like he put his heart and his soul into the game so much that Muhammad Ali would die.
Yeah,
like the dude, he would like leave it all out there. And Mike wasn't about that life, but he put that kind of persona that he was.
Yeah,
I thought he was a killer either way. Like
yeah, we all did. But that's why I love Mike Tyson, because he's so vulnerable that he'll say
so
that.
vulnerable, yeah.
And that's another thing too, is like vulnerability. People are afraid of vulnerability. I am. Like, I'm afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. That's another thing where I think about in terms of like the Way of the Superior Man book, he talks about like being open. And I think that vulnerability is in relation to that, like in the liberation that comes with that.
So why do you think you're afraid of that? You think you're afraid of the judgment?
Yeah, 100%. Can you relate to that?
I will say yes in the past, but I'm at a point like now where it's at a point like where you just don't care what people think. Definitely. And I think people relate to you more when you're more vulnerable. And they connect with you and they identify with you a lot more. Yeah. Like with this whole podcast, like people that have been listening since day one, I damn near tell them everything, you know? And
like all your struggles you're going
through. Yeah, and you know, life. once you do that, like it's almost like that scene in 8 Mile, where like Eminem's rapping and he puts out all his flaws out there, and now the other dude has nothing to say about him because he was vulnerable. Like the dude, like everything you could imagine, like you can say about him, he put it out there, put his flaws out there, and now he's like, what do you have to say now?
Yeah, I think it's incredible. I've been doing it. I've really never been more vulnerable in my life than I am now. Yeah. So like the conversations I have with my friends is I tell them everything about what I'm struggling with. And you know that, like
for sure.
I tell, because again, it goes back to like, if I died tomorrow, you would remember that. You would be like, wow, like he really didn't hold anything back. It's like, I'm gonna just leave it all here. Like, I feel like that's powerful.
Leave it all on the court.
Yes, sir.
For sure. Yeah. So we just really wanted to come on here, you know, real quick, just to talk about fear, how we deal with fear. Did you have anything else written down? Do you want to talk about?
No, sir.
No. We just wanted to come on here and just touch on fear real quick. Like I said, it's something that I've been hearing a lot lately, and you know, a lot of people we all deal with it. You know, I don't think anybody out there is fearless, but I just feel like if we have the courage to face it and really embrace our fears, then we have the power to overcome it, and just that would take us one step closer to our destiny.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, I appreciate you I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yes, sir.
And with that being said, it's your boy Chris, and I'll catch y'all next week.